Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. We believe life is about how we react. I'm Kyle Bryant. And I'm Sean Bombsark. Together, we are constantly seeking opportunities to live beyond our circumstances. All right, everybody out there, welcome back to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. This is episode 50. Yeah, I said 50. Holy cow. We are super excited. This episode is going to be all about Sean and I interviewing each other. And so we've split it into two episodes, actually. They're both called 50, but if this is the first one you've listened to, after you're done, make sure you listen to the other one, because one of them is me asking Sean questions and the other one is Sean asking me questions. This one that you're listening to right now, this is going to be the one where I ask Sean. So we will jump right into it. What do you think, Sean? You ready?
Yeah, this is good. And just FYI, in case this is your first one, I don't know what questions Kyle is about to
good point.
pose my direction. So we went into it knowing we were going to interview each other without revealing what we were going to talk about.
Yep. So anything goes. The gloves are coming off, man.
All right. I'm ready.
All right.
Hit me.
So
Hit me.
As a little warm-up, like we did in the other episode, we're going to do some rapid-fire either-or questions to start off with. And mine may not be as hard-hitting, but maybe maybe a little revealing. A little. Anyway, whatever. It's a warm-up. All right, here we go.
All right.
So the deal is, Sean, you've got to take less than 5 seconds to respond, and
Okay.
you can't explain your response. You just have to go with it. So,
Okay.
and I'm not gonna. I'll move pretty quickly through these. I've got 5 of them. All right, Sean. Beach,
Yes.
beach or mountains?
Beach.
If you're going out for a night or a day or an outing, would you rather go to a concert or go for a long bike ride?
Concert.
All right. Sushi or burger?
Oh, burger. Hands down. Hands down.
Go to the mall or do your shopping online?
Oh, online.
Kindle or paper book?
Paper.
Paper, all right.
Paper book.
There we go. That's all 5 of them.
All right.
Ooh. How do you feel after those? Pretty.
You know, yeah, I feel all right. I feel like the only one that really depends is mountain or beach.
Oh, okay.
That's the one where it's like, well, I guess it depends.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you mean? Depends on who you're going with, who's
Yeah, it
the
depends
concert,
on how long do I get to stay there? Is it just a day trip or several days? Is it a vacation?
Yeah,
or
okay.
just killing time? Like if I'm having a picnic, yeah, on the beach. If I'm trying to get away and focus my mind, I'm going to go to the mountains.
There you go. Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, maybe we'll revisit that little segment in the future and with some other questions. And so thank you, Sean. We're going to move into the regular interview section of this
so
podcast.
Nervous.
So
Okay.
Here we go. Sean, a lot of my questions are about your past and how that's shaped the Sean we know today. And so just to give people a little insight into how you grew up and your family and stuff, I wanted you to tell us about your family, and tell us about your immediate family tree and For me, I'm definitely gonna like do a little diagram here. So,
Okay. All right, fair. So I'm the youngest of 6 children. My parents were both married before and had 2 children in their first marriage. And then they married each other and had my whole brother and I. So I have 1 whole brother, but 4 half siblings. 3 brothers, 2 sisters, and me. So 4 boys, 2 girls. I'm the youngest. My whole brother Richard and I grew up together. My next oldest brother Philip, we have the same mom. We spent I remember him living in the house through like elementary school. But after that, he was old enough to join the military and he moved on with his life. We're still close today. In fact, that's who I spend Christmas with, his wife and their daughters. My nieces, they live in Southern California and we stay in touch pretty regularly. My whole brother and I, Richard, we've always been the closest in age and probably the closest in dealing with life experiences. We're not incredibly close today, but we do stay in touch. My sisters and I, we get along great, although they both live up in Washington State. We talk every now and then and always laugh and always have a wonderful time when we are able to get together or talk on the phone. My oldest brother, Michael, that was my dad's first child. He actually passed away about a year or so after my dad died. He was somewhere around, 40, 41, somewhere around there at the time. And yeah, that's it. All my siblings have kids, except for my whole brother. All of them are either married or have been married. Yeah, that's true for everybody, actually. So does that answer the question or give you definitely. A little diagram?
Appreciate that. And I feel like school is a big place where we all like grow up a whole lot, right? Like that's where we do a lot of it, form relationships and friendships and whatever else. I think you were homeschooled in high school, right? Is that true?
I was homeschooled through basically after elementary. I spent the rest of middle school and high school in a homeschool program. And at the time, I loved it, and that's what I wanted to do, and I was okay with that. So my parents homeschooled my whole brother and I through some of those formative years. Thankfully, we were also really involved in church, so a lot of my relationships and connections and friendships were driven through the life growing up in a very active evangelical Christian church. So that's really where a lot of my friends and memories come from. Beyond school, after high school, I went to a university in Missouri, a private university, and of course that would be the next major stage in developing friendships and relationships. But in those younger years, I was homeschooled, so everything really was centered around life in church.
Got it. So, Sean, you mentioned that your dad passed away. That was right before Race Across America. You talk about it in the movie, and he died of cancer. And I want to know what he meant to you and how your dad shaped the man you are. And it gets me emotional just asking the question because I know a little bit about what he meant to you, and I knew him a little bit. Anyway, so let our listeners know who your dad was and what he meant to you.
So I think, and I'm going to do my best to get through this.
Yeah.
I think it's true for both my parents. They have always been very supportive and involved in my life and everything I do. And I don't know if we're going to get into more history, but there have been a couple very significant milestones in my life that cost me a lot, cost my friends and my family a lot. Some choices I made that were devastating to a lot of people. And even in the midst of these difficult times, my parents remained incredibly faithful and supportive and encouraging to me. And it happened to be a very hectic, chaotic, tumultuous couple years leading up to my father's death. And in this period is where I feel like my dad and I became pretty darn close, because he was always robustly honest with me, but also always loving. And despite some very loud and honest conversations or debates or dialogues that he and I had, we always hugged, and he always reminded me that no matter what, I was his son, and he was going to find a way to support me. So in the midst of him battling cancer, I began to realize how fragile life was and how important such unwavering support is, whether it comes from family or friends. It's such a powerful pillar of strength in life, and he was certainly one of those guys that always found the silver lining. I think to our listeners, they know what we're up against and how devastating life can be and how challenging it is. And like you said, my dad was fighting cancer. And even though that was difficult and challenging and devastating and really, really ugly in a way, he always found ways to laugh and to make others laugh as well. In fact, when it comes to my siblings, some of my funniest and fondest moments and memories are when we were all in the hospital room and Dad was making us laugh. So he was definitely one of those guys that, despite how ugly life was getting, he found a way to still smile and still get out of bed when he could.
I love that so much. Good deal. So, you mentioned some situations that your dad was, helped you through and was there for you. Some people may not know that Sean, you were married before. You've been married.
I was. Yeah.
And you got married in 2010, is that true?
2008. Oh,
shoot. All right. Well, I was there. I went to your wedding. Tell our listeners about
it's not funny.
About your wedding and just the whole situation.
What do you mean by the wedding and the whole situation? Do you want to talk just wedding?
No. I want to talk about it. The wedding is my entry point to this topic.
Okay. So the wedding itself, amazing, beautiful. Had married a girl that I had essentially not grown up with, but right around the high school age and college, we had met and had the same circle of friends, and we actually went to college, overlapped a couple of years at the same university, and at one point she was one of my best friends, and we decided to get married, and we had an amazing, beautiful, huge wedding, and then a couple months later, I moved out and said, this is probably not going to work. And that that marriage ended rather quickly.
So
is that good enough?
Yeah, that is good. And by the way, your wife is super rad, and we've talked about this before. She's a great person. Sean, tell us why we haven't heard much about your wedding and
Sure.
and that relationship, and why did it end?
Yeah, I think I'm glad you say that because I agree. She was and is an incredible person. Although we're not in touch today, she's a beautiful soul. Her whole family are amazing, wonderful people. I went into marriage completely incomplete. Throughout my high school years and college, I had struggled with same-sex attractions and encounters, and just had this thing for guys. And growing up in the church, there was never any room for that. So I spent most of my 20s with this understanding that, sure, even though I found guys attractive, pursuing such relationships were inappropriate and not acceptable. So I had that belief, and I shared that kind of sentiment or that principle of life. And so for me, when it was time to sort of move on to the chapter of life where you're supposed to get married and buy a house and, start having babies and all those things, I was convinced that was the way life was meant to be. And even though I struggled with attractions to men, that was wrong, and there was no place for that. So I was convinced that if I just did what you were supposed to do, that eventually those attractions would go away. And, you've heard the phrase before, quote unquote, pray the gay away, things like that. So I was convinced that that's not how the world was meant to go around. So I needed to be married and have babies and go through life as a straight Christian. So that was the avenue I was taking. I had revealed this to her just a little bit before the marriage, but I also presented it in such a way that it was a thing of the past already, and that was not true. So I went into the marriage still struggling with wanting to be with guys and being attracted to them, and really just being broken in a lot of different ways. So once we got married, I realized, oh shoot, I felt like I had jumped in the ocean with a straitjacket on. In a really real way, I found it hard to breathe at night, or when I woke up, I found it hard to sleep. I found it hard to have healthy relationships with people that had been friends with me for a long time. So I really felt like mentally, physically, and spiritually, emotionally, all these things were going through a blender, and I don't really know where to go from here. But with all these things coming to a head, I realized I had unfairly asked this person to marry me and to try to build a life on a very broken foundation. So obviously that wasn't fair to her, wasn't fair to me, it wasn't fair to our friends and family. So the alternative and what we believed was the best approach at that time was to go our separate ways and try to figure life out.
So what did you do after, like, how did you deal with it for yourself after that happened, after the break in the marriage, and how'd you move on?
That was a very difficult time. As you know, I sort of disappeared for just over a year. Had some close family friends that helped me get through a couple days and a couple months, and my family, of course, were supportive. But at the time, I'd worked full-time at our church, and obviously there were a lot of things they didn't agree with, and I walked away from that as well. So really what I knew life to be at that stage I walked away from. Nobody yelled at me or threw things at my face, and nobody kicked me out of life. I essentially kind of removed myself from a lot of different things because I knew that it was unfair, and I had kind of misled a lot of people in a way. Even though they certainly agreed. Like, I don't want to say I wasn't fired, but essentially it was a mutual agreement that I needed to walk away from my job and my position in the church and some other things in order to figure life out. So very, very mutual for sure. So part of the way I dealt with it was to stay busy. I found a couple jobs that would help me just make ends meet. I definitely wasn't making a lot of money. At this stage of life, it was early 2009, end of 2008, so the economy was garbage. And even though I had a degree, I found myself waiting tables at this point and working at a gas station and really just making minimum wage to pay my bills. I also was going to counseling pretty regularly. I think once a week. Maybe it was every other week. It was pretty regular. So I found myself working to stay busy and then meeting with the counselor pretty regularly to work through all this stuff that was going on in my life. Does that answer your question?
No, it does. Absolutely. And so we haven't heard much about your personal life or your sexuality on the podcast. And why not?
That's a good question, and I'm glad you asked it that way. I think part of the reason I don't talk about it, part of the reason it's definitely not a secret. If it was, I wouldn't let you record this conversation. But I'm also not very loud about things that are that personal. I don't know exactly why I'm that way, but certainly not a big secret, but it's not something I advertise either. And I think really the biggest reason why it's not something that's common conversation for me is that even to this day, I wrestle with my own belief system, especially regarding sexuality. To one degree, I'm okay with my sexuality, but to another degree, I am not okay with it. So I feel like it's still a wrestling match in my own mind, in my own soul, if you will.
Yeah, well, I know it's not an easy thing to talk about. And maybe that's partly, like you just said, that's partly the reason it's not the first thing that you lead with in every conversation, right?
Sure.
So,
and I think to add a little more, I think part of the reason why it's still a struggle for me is, I want to be a dad. I want to have kids. And I know there are alternative ways to being a father, but I've always had this picture and this dream of what a traditional family looks like, and I've not been able to give up on that or to bury that idea. I know that it would be unfair for me to marry another woman or to get into a relationship like that, because I would say 98% of me is attracted to men. I find it a bit of a challenge for me to move on in either direction, because I find it difficult to be happy going either way.
So, Sean, you talked a little bit about it. You've got your organization, Determinants, that you built. Just briefly, for those who maybe this is their first or second episode, describe what determinist is real quick.
Yeah, I think, when I was diagnosed with Friedreich's ataxia, part of that prognosis was I wouldn't be able to walk someday, and the doctor told me I wouldn't be able to ride a bike. I shouldn't use a treadmill. I should just swim. Basically, he said, your whole exercise regime should be in the pool. And in response to that, I felt fine. Besides being a little wobbly, I was like, well, I don't understand. Why can't I walk, or why won't I be able to walk? So with that in mind, I started hiking and doing some early things outdoors because I could. And in doing this, I began to realize that it was inspiring myself to keep doing things like that, and I found a bit of empowerment just in walking a few blocks or climbing a little bunny hill, or little things like that. And other people in my life were drawing the same sort of encouragement from my endeavors, so I felt like there was room for a organization or a foundation, if you will, to help other people in similar situations as mine get out and do things like that. We talked about my dad and having cancer. There were a lot of things he couldn't do. Besides having cancer, he was disabled due to a gunshot wound in Vietnam. So there were a lot of things that even he struggled with physically, yet he always walked, or he bought a bike, and he always rode, and those things were not going to hold him back. And I feel like I get a little bit of my drive from his side of biology, or the drive and passion to live beyond circumstance. And when I realized that other people were finding some encouragement through my story, I thought, we can do this for other people. I bet there's enough people out there that are dealing with cancer or FA or some other condition that's keeping them from climbing a small mountain or a large mountain. And what if we were able to put together the resources and the team, the people, to help them get to the top of any mountain? So that's where determinants came from. The idea was is to provide the resources and the people necessary to help others run a marathon, or participate in a marathon, or climb a mountain. Very much like Make-A-Wish Foundation is the way I like to think of it. But instead of sending somebody to Hollywood to be on, a backstage pass, or go to a concert or Disney World, we're helping people that want to participate in marathons or climb mountains. We're helping them make that a reality.
I love it. So what are your ambitions for yourself or for the organization? Those two things are probably linked at some point, but
sure.
What's your vision? And I guess we talked about how a vision can be a difficult thing too if things don't work out, but it's also a useful thing as well, like having something to shoot for. So what does that look like for you?
Well, there is no backup plan, so I realize that the vision might change in time, but right now the vision for my life is with today's reality in mind. One of the ambitions for the nonprofit and for myself is to stand on top of all 14,000-foot mountains in California. A big dream is to climb a few of the major sevens in the world. And
what is that?
I feel so the highest peaks or the tallest peaks around the world on each continent.
I see.
And of course, we all know Mount Everest is the tallest, but then North America has Mount Denali, and Africa has Kilimanjaro, and there are 7 of those. So I would like to tackle a couple of them. I don't expect to ever stand on top of Mount Everest, but I can't tell you that I never dream about it. So who knows what could happen. But
Yeah.
for myself, while I'm still upright, I want to at least conquer the California 14s. I would like to eventually write a book or two. I would like to continue traveling the world and encouraging and helping others see that there is so much more to life than circumstance and find ways to live beyond those. So those are some of the major goals for me.
Beautiful.
Or big picture items.
Love it. Love it.
And I hope for the tournaments, it's not just me that we're getting to the top of these mountains. To cast a little bit of the vision for the nonprofit, I hope that we're able to, the vision is to help a lot of people participate in marathons, whether that's on their own 2 feet or in a hand cycle or whatever adaptive equipment they need. I hope that we help people get to the top of mountains. And in fact, I don't just hope, I know we're going to. I expect to be able to help people compete in a race across America. I intend to operate fitness facilities, exercise facilities. I know it's important for people with disabilities to be able to exercise in one fashion or another. And I also know that it can be uncomfortable to go to a traditional gym where either people are or you feel like everybody is watching you, and it can be intimidating and uncomfortable and create a bunch of anxiety. So I'd like to operate some facilities that cater to folks with disabilities but gives them access to exercise equipment and exercise professionals. Eventually, I hope to be able to provide counseling for individuals that are facing a new diagnosis and their families. We'd like to be able to, in a professional psychological way, help them adjust, if you will.
Yeah.
Those are some of the big picture dreams down the road.
It's a lot of stuff, man.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's one of the reasons that you and I get along, because, you know, that list of dreams or visions, it's options. It's not just a dream. It's let's figure out how to get this done. So, I know you've been speaking a little more lately. You just did a gig at Sherpa Clinical Packaging, and I know that went over really well. But I want to ask you a question that you ask many of our guests, and I think you even asked a similar question to me when you were interviewing me, is when you get on stage, what's your number one main message, and what's some of the words you use to deliver that message to your audience?
Yeah, that's good. My main message is probably similar to yours and this podcast. There is always a reason to get out of bed. No matter what you're up against, your attitude and your perspective and your decisions are just that. They're your choices. How we can get through a rough diagnosis, or how we can get through bankruptcy, or how we get through a loss of loved ones, it's our choice. Everybody's going to have a bad day along the way, and you know, everybody's got money problems. I think we made this correlation at one point. Warren Buffett has money problems. Jeff Bezos has money problems. They're just different than my money problems. Much different. But they still have things that stress them out, that make them nervous, that make them anxious. And we're all still going to have things to grieve in life. And I think no matter what, going back to one of our favorite guests, Dr. Fagenbaum, he talked about his mother and the way she said, you know, you don't just look for the silver lining. Sometimes you have to create a silver lining. And I think the ultimate message when I stand up on stage, or when I'm even at a meeting at work, ultimately, attitude is a choice, and how I choose to move forward is in my control.
Yep. Yep, that is the one thing that we always have control of, right? No matter what happens to us.
That's true.
And I think you and I can both admit that we don't react in. It's not always great, but we always have control over it.
Yeah, it's not always that easy. There's nothing saying it's easy to walk up White Mountain or anything others, something like that. But I know at the end of the day, in fact, one of my closest friends helped me realize this, and yeah, I know you didn't ask, but I'm throwing it out there anyway.
Sounds good. Please.
Determinants was birthed in 2007. And that word is made up. It's a hybrid of determination and resilience. And then, of course, we talked about I got married in 2008, and then all of that part of life came to an end right at the beginning of 2009. Well, in the midst of, feeling like I'm scum and being ashamed and just, like I said, I disappeared and I just went through a stage of life where I didn't know which way was up. One of my dearest friends, Nate Conley, in fact, you've met him before, he called me one day and we were talking, and here I am kind of, not physically crying, but I was basically just kind of talking about how life was over in a sense. And he kind of, if he was standing in front of me, he probably would have punched me in the face, but his words were the same sort of reality. He's like, wait a minute, I'm hearing all this woe is me from the guy that launched a nonprofit called Determinants, where no matter what, your determination of the mind determines what happens next. And he sort of kind of helped me see that even in a million other areas of my life, determinants wasn't just about disease. It was about walking through my issues and my concerns and my frustrations and my anxieties and everything else. And he said, where's your own determinants in the midst of this storm that you're in? And I was like, dang, okay then. I think you're right. I'll rethink who I am and where I'm going. So that was an eye-opening conversation for me.
Yeah, I love that. I've heard that a few times, but I absolutely love that because sometimes the best thing a friend can do in what they do is hold up a mirror, right? And be like, hey, this is you, man. Like, you should be able to get through this. You're the one. You've been saying all this. Now put it into practice. Make it happen. And I love that.
For sure.
All right, Sean. Well, thanks so much for your openness. I think that's a big principle of this podcast. And 2 years in, I'm glad that we could have this conversation and be open with everything in life. And I think that's something that we want to continue. Not that we haven't been open up to this point, but I think it's a principle that we want to follow in this podcast. So thank you for that.
Sure. Of course, thanks for the great questions. That was interesting.
All right.
Well, yeah, interesting to say the least, but also a lot of fun. I appreciate the, in a sense, you just held up a mirror, I guess, right? So thank you for that. Listeners, thank you so much for joining us today and encouraging us to keep going. The reason why we're recording episodes like this is because you keep listening. So thank you. Hopefully we didn't lose you on number 50. If you are here and you haven't heard the other one, be sure to check out the other episode 50. That's where you have a chance to hear from Kyle. I ask him a bunch of questions, and he opens up for the sake of me and our listeners. So be sure to check that out. And again, thank you for helping us get to 50 episodes. We hope you continue to enjoy the podcast. Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast.
Find us online at twodisableddudes.com and please subscribe on the iTunes. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
special thanks to our production team, Jake Tompkins and Matt LaFleur.
Until next time, keep living with urgency.